Minister, Fianna Fáil has serious concerns about the proposed sale of ESB plants in Loughree and West Offaly. I and Deputy Corcoran and others in the region received an email yesterday from ESB asking that we meet their representatives. They stated we were to be briefed on an imminent announcement affecting our constituency. I was intrigued and expected and hoped it would be a positive development. However, it wasn't to be the case. I was informed that as part of the government's directive to state and semi-state bodies, ESB was not only selling international assets in Spain and the UK, but it was also proposing to sell ESB power plants in West Offaly and Loughree, that being Shannonbridge in Offaly and Lanesborough in Longford, respectively. My initial reaction, I have to say, was one of shock. I was shocked that, despite the fact that this House has never acquiesced to the demands to debate the McCarthy report, to discuss it, its contents or its recommendations, and it was only by asking questions of government that this House received assurances as to what was on and off the table as regards what was on and off the portfolio of assets to be sold. My immediate concern, of course, was that of Bord-na-Mona, of ESB and Coillte. My county of Offaly and constituency in the Midlands region is synonymous with power generation and energy production. The sector has been challenged over the years as peat stocks depleted, as new forms of energy and tapering of fossils continued at pace. However, such change and diversification in commercial realities were met head-on by the workforce, met head-on by management, met head-on by the government, the then government, and political representatives of all hues, I might add. And such innovation and initiative and leadership under Fianna Fáil led to the creation of Loughree Power, West Offaly Power and Eden-Derry Power, each with the support of Bord-na-Mona contracts and PSO in conjunction with EU guidelines and directives ensuring the future of power generation in the Midlands for at least 25 years from inception. That inception, in the case of Lanesborough and Shannonbridge, began in 2005 and 2006 respectively. That 25-year guarantee then began in 2005 and 2006. It's now 2013, just 8 years later. And despite that, and more specifically, despite a commitment in this House in May of this year, when the Minister for Expenditure and Public Reform, Brendan Howland, told it all, and I quote, "With regard to the ESB," he said, "there will be no sale of any power generating capacity in the Republic or the island of Ireland." Now, that commitment doesn't fall into the category of, isn't that what you do at elections? That commitment doesn't fall into the category of those of making commitments on the back of lorries in Roscommon. Doesn't fall into the commitments on lorries outside this House to over 70s. That commitment was given here. And I would have thought there had been more respect for the Chamber, for the House, and for this Parliament.
1 minute remaining.
I can understand the disrespect for lorries in Roscommon and outside of the gates. But be that as it may, Minister, and despite the fact that the credibility of you and your government in my constituency is left severely dented by this, I now ask of you some severe and honest questions. Can you ensure the workers, firstly, what is the situation with regard to their contract of employment? And secondly, what happens now to their pensions, those ESB pensions? These power plants, if their ownership is to be transferred, how is it that you will transfer their pensions? Will they be defined benefit pensions, or will they be defined as contribution pensions? Please let our community know what the future of the most important industry in our area will be. What will be done to ensure that employment in our area is maintained? What will be done to secure the future of energy production in Offaly and beyond? And I want to ask you also, Minister, have you, or your government, have you considered a scenario where Bord-na-Mona would take over these plants? And wouldn't that be the shot in the arm that it needs? Wouldn't that add to its various measures, as you mentioned earlier today when you opened a wind farm in Laois, add to the sort of diversification in the energy sector that is necessary in order for there to be a competitive market out there that will allow the consumer cheaper access to electricity? That is the commitment our region requires. That is the commitment that would allow Bord-na-Mona to develop further and longer into the future, and would allow this region and our region continue to be the leader in power generation in this country.
4 minutes also from Minister.
Cancolia, I'm grateful to Deputy Cowen for allowing me to answer this question, and I can tell him that the credibility of the government is very high in his constituency. I've just come back from there, where we have announced measures that will bring additional employment to different parts of the Midlands, including the Deputy's own constituency. When he talks about the commitments given to Lanesborough and Shannon Bridge in 2005, and that it's now 2018, what he forgets, Alas Cancolia, is that 2008 intervened, and 2008 will go down as a milestone in the economic history of this country, and of course has, as Yeats would have said, changed everything. Everything is utterly changed. Arising from the commitment in the bailout agreement between the Irish government and the Troika in 2010, and following months of negotiation between the Troika and the new government, in February 2012, the Irish government announced its intention to consider a range of disposal options across the state sector to achieve a goal of realising proceeds of up to $3 billion. The government indicated in July 2012 that a sale of the energy business of Bord Gáis and some of ESB's non-strategic power gen would be part of the asset disposal programme. The government subsequently formally requested ESB in October 2012 to develop a programme for the sale of its non-strategic generation capacity with the objective of delivering special dividends to the government targeted at up to $400 million by the end of 2014. Leaving the ESB power stations aside for a second, it's important that the parameters of this issue be set out. If the original intention to raise $5 billion from the disposal of state assets had stood, it would inevitably have given rise to pressure to privatise the ESB. I'm glad, for a variety of reasons, in the national interest, that the ESB will be retained in state ownership as a vertically integrated utility. ESB, as a state-owned energy company, has made a major contribution to Irish economic and social development. It is equally correct to record that the ESB, notwithstanding growing competition in the generation and supply business, which I welcome, has been a commercial success over the years, and particularly in recent years. The sale of these assets was not expected to achieve the full amount of the required special dividend. I'm referring to the assets, Las Cancolian, Britain and Spain. The sale of these assets were not expected to achieve the full amount of the required special dividend of up to $400 million, and will not do so. Accordingly, the ESB has now announced its intention to sell its two peat stations, West Offaly Power and Loughrea Power. In selling West Offaly Power and Loughrea Power, ESB will be proposing to prospective buyers an arrangement under which it, the ESB that is, continues to operate and maintain the peat stations with existing staff. If there's any change to this, the ESB will consult with staff and unions prior to the sale.
Mark Darren, Chuck the Barry Cowen, 2 minutes for a supplementary statement.
Thank you, Ms. Corla. First of all, the Minister immediately seeks to revert back to 2008. It's the stock answer to any question from this side of the House, irrespective of the content of said question. But can I say, when you talk about credibility and you want to refer to previous commitments and refer to previous statements by various members of various political parties, I mentioned what Minister Howland said here as recently as May. He made no reference to that comment and that commitment that he made in this House. That there would, I repeat it for you. He said, as regards sale of any ESB asset, it would not include any generating station in the Republic or the island of Ireland. Now, if anybody has a credibility problem, it's you in that regard. In relation to the memorandums of understanding, I'll quote from a letter after the first visit by the Troika from Minister Noonan. He referred to our plans being the government's plans. It is important that we make effective use of our state assets and, where appropriate, dispose of them to help reduce our government debt. And that was the first occasion on which the same state assets were mentioned in the context of paying down debt. Therefore, it is the actions of this government which move the state's commitment to consider possible privatisation to an ambitious programme, and I quote, ambitious programme which would help reduce government debt. Now that's that issue out of the way. We're going to have an argument, we're going to rerun the last election every 6 months to satisfy your poll ratings and try and rise it out of the ashes of 6%. That's your business. But I'm in the interest of looking after the constituents that asked me to raise this issue with you here today. What commitment can you give my constituents, those workforce, in relation to their pension entitlements in the first instance? And have you, I'll ask you again, have you given any consideration, or your government or any member of it, given consideration to the role Bord na Móna can play post-2019, post-2020? Because it appears to me that what has been offered for sale has the benefit of Bord na Móna contracts and PSO commitments up to 2020 and nothing thereafter.
Thank you, Deputy. I'm calling the Minister.
You can answer that question properly and effectively. Maybe then your credibility can be restored.
Tara, 2 minutes to conclude.
Well, it's a while since I've seen anyone in the House with the bullish attitude of Deputy Cowen without having any facts to back him up. I'll start, if you like, with your last question, Bord na Móna. Bord na Móna is a commercial state company, and if it wants to bid for these assets, it's free to bid for them. But it would be very odd, given that the whole purpose of what we have been forced into is disposal of state assets. It would be very odd to have another state company buying the assets. I'm afraid.
Minister only has a.
I'm afraid, Deputy Cowen, that the fact of the matter is, and only as recently as the gas bill going through this House, did I take the opportunity to put on the record of the House the origins of this issue, which are in the 2010 bailout agreement, when the then Fianna Fáil-led government agreed on the sale of state assets. And in fact, at the first meeting that the new government had with the Troika, when they told us about the $5 billion commitment, we started negotiations. They went on for 6 months, and instead of the figure of $5 billion, we agreed the figure of $3 billion, and instead of the $5 billion being used to write down debt, we got a commitment that 50% of whatever proceeds were realised would go towards the creation of employment and reinvestment for productive purposes. So that, unfortunately, is the history, and Deputy Cowen is now trying to rewrite history. I'll deal with Deputy Howlin as well. This is nothing new, what is here this evening. Nothing new at all. I have mentioned it in this House and outside of this House, time out of number. Not in the case of naming the 2 stations, but naming the government decision to dispose of the energy business of Bord Gáis Éireann and some power gen in the ESB. That's as old as is the lifetime of the government. And what Deputy Howlin was correctly telling the House is that no such power gen would be disposed of this year. And nor will there be, nor will there be, nor will there be. What we're talking about here is, and I gave it to you in my original answer, was that we're required to produce up to 400 million from the ESB in special dividends before the end of 2014.
Thank you, Minister.
And that's what's afoot. So, and as regards Michael Noonan, you've taken a letter of Michael Noonan's completely out of context. Who do you think Michael Noonan could write on behalf of, but the government of which he's a member? But the reason he was writing was the agreement entered into in 2010. And it's very fortunate. It's very fortunate, Alaska and Korea.
We have to conclude.
It's very.
Okay.
It's very fortunate. It's very fortunate. It's very fortunate, Alaska and Korea, that I happened by accident to hold the job I do. If I didn't, Fianna Fáil would have privatised the ESB. I'm very proud to say that that won't happen under my stewardship.